What happens when one of Hollywood's most beloved actors walks onto a talk show set, expecting a normal conversation, only to face a barrage of disrespect that pushes him past his breaking point? It only took 36 seconds of one particularly vicious comment for the entire interview to explode into chaos, ending with the guest storming off the set and leaving the host speechless in front of a stunned studio audience. Pedro Pascal settled into the guest chair, his warm smile lighting up the stage as the applause died down. He'd done hundreds of interviews before, promoting projects, sharing stories, connecting with audiences. This should have been simple. Another late-night appearance, another chance to talk about his work. But Greg Gutfeld had other plans. "So Pedro," Gutfeld began, leaning back in his chair with an air of casual superiority, "let's talk about your latest project. Another one of those streaming shows where you brood intensely and pretend the world is ending." The audience laughed nervously. Pedro's smile tightened just slightly, but he kept his composure. "Well, I'd say it's a bit more nuanced than that. We're exploring themes of family, sacrifice, and what people are willing to do when everything they love is threatened." Gutfeld waved his hand dismissively. Right. Very deep. Very profound. Tell me something. Do you actors ever get tired of lecturing the rest of us about morality while you collect your massive paychecks?" Pedro blinked, surprised by the sudden shift in tone. "I'm sorry, what?" "You heard me," Gutfeld continued, that smirk never leaving his face. "You people in Hollywood, you live in your bubbles, completely disconnected from reality. And then you have the audacity to tell regular Americans how to think and feel." The audience had gone quiet now. Pedro shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening. "I don't think that's what I do at all. I try to tell stories that resonate with people, that reflect the human experience." "The human experience?" Gutfeld laughed, a sharp, mocking sound. "Please, you live in a mansion and play dress-up for a living. What do you know about the real struggles everyday people face?" Pedro's hands gripped the armrests of his chair. "I immigrated to this country with my family. We struggled. We worked hard. I know exactly what it means to fight for a better life." "Oh, here we go," Gutfeld said, rolling his eyes dramatically. "The immigrant sob story. Tell me, Pedro, do you think your success gives you the right to speak for all immigrants? To push political agendas?" "I'm not pushing anything," Pedro replied, his voice firm but controlled. "I'm sharing my experience. That's what artists do. We tell our truths." Gutfeld leaned forward, his expression suddenly harder. "Your truth. That's the problem right there. You people think your truth is the only truth, that anyone who disagrees with you is somehow evil or ignorant. That's not what I said at all," Pedro countered. "You're putting words in my mouth." "Am I?" Gutfeld challenged. "Because I've seen your social media. I've seen the things you post. You're pretty vocal about your opinions. Pretty quick to judge people who don't share your worldview." Pedro took a deep breath, visibly trying to maintain his composure. "I believe in standing up for what's right. I believe in using whatever platform I have to speak out against injustice. If that bothers you, I can't help that." "Injustice," Gutfeld repeated, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "You mean like not getting enough award nominations? Or having to deal with criticism? Those are the injustices you're fighting against?" The audience was completely silent now, the tension palpable. Pedro's face had flushed, his eyes bright with restrained anger. "You're being deliberately obtuse. You know that's not what I'm talking about." "Then enlighten me," Gutfeld said, spreading his hands wide. "What great injustices are you battling? From your privileged position?" "Human rights," Pedro said, his voice rising slightly. "Basic human dignity. The right for people to exist without fear of persecution based on who they are or where they come from." Gutfeld scoffed. "There you go again, acting like America is some kind of oppressive nightmare. Meanwhile, you've built an incredible career here. You've been rewarded handsomely for your work. Doesn't seem very oppressive to me. The fact that I've succeeded doesn't mean the system is perfect, Pedro argued. It doesn't mean there isn't work to be done. It doesn't mean I should just shut up and be grateful. Actually, Gutfeld shot back, maybe it does. Maybe a little gratitude would be refreshing instead of constant complaining. Pedro's hands were trembling now, his knuckles white from gripping the chair. I am grateful, but gratitude doesn't mean blind loyalty. It doesn't mean ignoring problems that need to be addressed. Problems, Gutfeld muttered. You want to talk about problems? Let's talk about how Hollywood has become a machine for pushing propaganda. How every movie, every show has to have some kind of message, some kind of agenda. Art has always reflected society, Pedro said firmly. Stories have always been about more than just entertainment. They challenge us. They make us think. They help us understand each other better. Gutfeld laughed again, that same contemptuous sound. Spare me the lecture. You're not some profound philosopher. You're an actor. You read lines other people write and you cash checks. That's it. The disrespect was evident in every word, every gesture. Pedro's breathing had quickened, his entire body rigid with the effort of staying seated. If that's how you see it, then I don't know why you invited me here. Good question, Gutfeld replied. Maybe I wanted to see if you could handle being challenged instead of praised. Seems like you're not doing too well with that. Challenged? Pedro's voice was sharp now. You're not challenging me. You're insulting me. There's a difference. Oh, I'm sorry, Gutfeld said with exaggerated concern. Did I hurt your feelings? Are you used to everyone just nodding along and telling you how wonderful you are? Pedro stood up suddenly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. I'm used to being treated with basic respect, which is apparently too much to ask for on this show. Sit down, Gutfeld commanded, his smile finally fading. We're not done here. Yes, we are, Pedro said firmly. I came here in good faith. I thought we'd have a conversation. But you're not interested in conversation. You just want to belittle and mock. Gutfeld's face darkened. You're being oversensitive. If you can't handle a little pushback, maybe you should stick to your echo chamber. Pushback? Pedro's voice rose. You've done nothing but attack me from the moment I sat down. You've questioned my integrity, my intelligence, my right to have an opinion. That's not pushback. That's hostility. I'm asking tough questions, Gutfeld insisted. Questions your fans won't ask you. Questions that need to be asked. No, Pedro said, shaking his head. You're grandstanding. You're using me as a prop to score points with your audience. You're not interested in my answers. You made up your mind about me before I even walked through that door. The audience was watching in shocked silence, some people shifting uncomfortably in their seats. This had gone far beyond the usual playful banter of late-night television. Gutfeld stood up too, his posture aggressive. You don't get to come on my show and then dictate how I run it. You don't get to play the victim because someone finally called out your hypocrisy. Hypocrisy? Pedro's voice was incredulous. What hypocrisy? Caring about people? Wanting to make the world a better place? That's hypocrisy to you? Preaching about equality while you benefit from inequality, Gutfeld shot back. Talking about the struggles of regular people while you live a life they could never imagine. Yeah, I'd call that hypocritical. Pedro's laugh was bitter. You have no idea what you're talking about. You don't know me. You don't know my life, my experiences, what I've been through. I know enough, Gutfeld said coldly. I know you're just another celebrity who thinks their fame gives them moral authority, who thinks being on television makes their opinion more valuable than anyone else's. That's rich coming from you, Pedro fired back. You have your own show. You broadcast your opinions every single night. But when someone else uses their platform, suddenly it's a problem. Gutfeld's face reddened. I'm a commentator. That's my job. You're supposed to be an entertainer. Stay in your lane. Stay in my lane? Pedro's voice was dangerously quiet now. Who are you to tell me what I can and cannot talk about? Who gave you that authority? I have every right to criticize public figures who abuse their influence, Gutfeld declared. And I have every right to stand up for what I believe in, Pedro countered. You can disagree with me. You can challenge my ideas, but you don't get to tell me to shut up and act. Gutfeld stepped closer. His finger pointed at Pedro. You know what your problem is? You can't handle being disagreed with. You live in a world where everyone agrees with you, and the moment someone pushes back, you fall apart. I'm not falling apart, Pedro said, his voice steady despite the anger in his eyes. I'm refusing to participate in this circus. There's a difference between disagreement and disrespect, and you crossed that line a long time ago. Then leave, Gutfeld said, his arms crossed. If you can't handle the heat, get off my stage. Pedro stared at him for a long moment, the silence stretching out. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but filled with conviction. You want to know what I can't handle? I can't handle people. Like you who hide behind the guise of asking tough questions when really you're just being cruel. I can't handle the way you diminish real struggles by mocking anyone who tries to address them. I can't handle how you use your platform not to inform or enlighten, but to divide and belittle. Are you done? Gutfeld asked, his tone bored. Almost, Pedro said. You invited me here thinking you could make me look foolish? Thinking you could get me to lose my temper, to say something you could use against me. But here's what actually happened. You showed your audience exactly who you are. Someone more interested in scoring points than having genuine dialogue. Someone who treats guests with contempt and calls it journalism. Gutfeld's jaw clenched. Get off my stage. Gladly, Pedro replied. He began to unclip his microphone, his movements deliberate and controlled. You're making a mistake, Gutfeld called out. Walking off my show, it's going to make you look weak. Pedro paused, looking back at the host. No, staying here and allowing myself to be disrespected would make me weak. Walking away from someone who has no interest in treating me like a human being, that's not weakness. That's self-respect. This is pathetic, Gutfeld sneered. You really can't handle any criticism, can you? I've handled plenty of criticism in my career, Pedro said quietly. Thoughtful criticism. Constructive criticism. What you're doing isn't criticism. It's performance, and I'm not going to be part of it. The microphone came free, and Pedro held it for a moment before setting it carefully on his chair. The entire studio was frozen, cameras still rolling, audience members barely breathing. Gutfeld made one last attempt to regain control. You're going to regret this, walking off a show like a child throwing a tantrum. Pedro turned to face him fully, his expression sad more than angry now. The only thing I regret is not walking off sooner. I came here thinking you might actually be interested in a conversation, that underneath the persona, there might be someone willing to engage genuinely. I was wrong. I don't need lectures from you, Gutfeld spat. No, Pedro agreed. You don't need lectures. You need to look in the mirror and ask yourself what you're really accomplishing here. Are you making the world better? Are you bringing people together? Are you adding anything of value? Or are you just feeding anger and division because it gets you ratings? Gutfeld's face was scarlet now. Get out. I'm going, Pedro said. He looked out at the audience, many of whom were watching him with sympathy and support in their eyes. Thank you for being here tonight. I'm sorry you had to witness this. He walked toward the exit, his steps measured and dignified. Gutfeld called after him, but Pedro didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge the continued jabs and insults being thrown at his back. As Pedro reached the edge of the stage, Gutfeld made his final, most vicious comment. This is what happens when you give celebrities a voice. They think they're important. They think they matter more than everyone else. But the truth is, you're just a guy who pretends to be other people. That's all you'll ever be. A pretender. Pedro stopped. For a moment, it seemed like he might turn back, might respond to this last attack. But instead, he took a breath, squared his shoulders, and continued walking. He disappeared behind the curtain, leaving Gutfeld standing alone on the stage, his audience silent, his victory hollow. The host tried to recover, to make some joke, to move on as if nothing significant had happened. Well, there you have it, folks. Can't take the heat. Leave the kitchen, right? His laugh was forced, uncomfortable. But the damage was done. The audience wasn't laughing with him anymore. Some were still staring at the spot where Pedro had disappeared. Others were whispering to each other, their faces troubled. Gutfeld cleared his throat. We'll be right back after this break. The cameras cut, and the lights dimmed slightly. In the dressing room, Pedro was already gathering his things, his hands still shaking slightly from the adrenaline. A production assistant knocked timidly on the door. Mr. Pascal, are you okay? Pedro looked up, managing a small smile. I'm fine. Thank you for asking. That was really brave, the young woman said quietly. What you did out there? I don't know about brave, Pedro replied, zipping up his bag. But it was necessary. Back on the set, Gutfeld was pacing, trying to decide how to proceed when they came back from commercial. His producers were frantically discussing damage control, how to spin this, how to minimize the fallout. But there was no spinning it. The moment had been captured, broadcast live. Viewers had seen the entire exchange, had watched a talented, respected actor being systematically degraded and disrespected by a host more interested in confrontation than conversation. In that dressing room, Pedro took one last look in the mirror. His face was still flushed, his eyes bright, but there was something else there too. Relief, satisfaction. He'd stood up for himself. He'd refused to be diminished. He'd walked away from a situation that was designed to make him look bad, and in doing so, he'd revealed the true nature of his antagonist. The 36 seconds that had started this downward spiral kept replaying in his mind. That moment when Gutfeld had accused him of being a pretender, of not mattering. Those words had been the catalyst, the spark that ignited everything that followed. But Pedro knew something that Gutfeld didn't seem to understand. Words had power, actions had consequences, and respect was something that had to be earned, not demanded. As he walked out of the studio and into the cool night air, Pedro felt lighter than he had in hours. The interview was over. The confrontation was behind him, and he'd maintained his dignity throughout. Inside, the show was coming back from commercial. Gutfeld was attempting to continue as normal, bringing out his next guest, making jokes, pretending that nothing unusual had occurred. But everyone knew. The audience knew. The viewers at home knew. Even Gutfeld himself knew, though he'd never admit it. The interview that was supposed to make the guests look foolish had backfired spectacularly. Instead, it had exposed the host's cruelty, his lack of professionalism, his willingness to attack someone simply for holding different beliefs. Pedro had come to the show in good faith. He'd been prepared to discuss his work, to engage in friendly banter, to connect with the audience. He'd been met with hostility from the very beginning, questioned and challenged not on his ideas, but on his right to have ideas at all. And when he'd finally had enough, when he'd chosen to walk away rather than continue to subject himself to abuse disguised as discourse, he'd done so with grace and dignity. The host had tried to paint the departure as weakness, as an inability to handle criticism, but anyone watching could see the truth. Walking away from disrespect wasn't weakness. It was strength. It was self-respect. It was a refusal to participate in a system designed to degrade and diminish. Gutfeld continued his show, but the energy had shifted. His jokes fell flat. His commentary seemed hollow. The audience was distracted, still processing what they'd witnessed. And somewhere in the city, Pedro Pascal was heading home, his conscience clear, his dignity intact. He'd been invited to a show that turned into an ambush. He'd been disrespected and mocked by someone who wielded his platform like a weapon rather than a tool for connection. But he'd made his choice. He'd stood up. He'd spoken his truth. And he'd walked away when it became clear that no productive conversation was possible. The interview would be talked about for days, weeks, months to come. People would debate who was right, who was wrong, what really happened. But those who watched it unfold in real time knew the truth. They'd seen a guest treated with contempt. They'd seen a host abuse his position. And they'd seen a man choose his self-respect over continued participation in a degrading spectacle. In those final moments before Pedro left the stage, before he removed his microphone and walked away, there had been a clarity in his eyes, a decision made, a line drawn. You can only push someone so far before they push back. You can only disrespect someone for so long before they refuse to accept it anymore. And when someone finally stands up and says enough, when they choose to leave rather than endure, that says far more about the person who drove them away than it does about the person who left. The show ended eventually, as all shows do. The audience filed out, murmuring among themselves. The crew began to break down the set. The lights dimmed. But the impact of what had happened that night would linger. In the minds of those who watched, in the conversations that would follow, in the understanding that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away. Pedro Pascal had walked onto that stage as a guest. He'd been treated as a target, and he'd left as someone who refused to be anyone's punching bag, no matter how bright the lights or how large the audience. The 36 seconds that changed everything. The moment when disrespect crossed the line into something worse. The point of no return, and the choice to stand up, speak out, and walk away with dignity intact. That was the real story. Not the host's provocations, not the manufactured controversy, but one person's refusal to accept treatment that diminished his humanity. That was what happened when Greg Gutfeld pushed Pedro Pascal too far. That was the moment everything fell apart. And that was why, in the end, the guest who walked away was the one who truly won.